Welcome back. We are Comp 229, Web Application Development, and it's week 6, part 1. We're going to be talking about authentication with Passport. Right, let's do a knowledge check again. So last week we talked about Mongoose, and we performed full CRUD on our MongoDB database. We added a book list, so we know how to do that, except it's not protected. It doesn't make any sense that we can have a book list, let's say on a store, and that anybody can go in and add and remove books. That's not the kind of store maybe that we want. For this one, you should also know a little bit about security. We're going to be talking about some security, but you should have read ahead and kind of know the difference between authentication and authorization at the least. We're also going to install a new Passport module, as well as the Passport local strategy. We're going to be talking about that. We're going to add some basic views for to prepare for logging in and registration. We have to do those kind of things as well. And after this video, you should be way more comfortable with Mongoose and basic web security. All right, so what is Passport? Passport is a way that we can use an NPM module that we can use for authenticating users. And there's a bunch of different kinds of strategies. So one thing that Passport has is different strategies for authentication. So let's take a look at view all the strategies. So tons of them. We have, as an example, a Passport strategy. We can use something called OAuth. And what OAuth allows us to do is log in with somebody else's trust credentials. So for example, let's say we have an account with Facebook. Well, we can create a trust relationship with Facebook. If Facebook trusts the user, so too should we trust the user. And so we can use their authentication. We don't have to hold information on our site. We actually go through their site, and they provide a token, an authentication token for us, so that we can use Facebook authentication. You see a lot of that. Log in with Facebook, log in with Google, log in with GitHub, and there's a bunch of other ones that they mentioned. You can see that there's a ton of them, and they keep adding them. Passport with LinkedIn, and so on. Tons and tons of them. The one we want to use is Passport Local. Passport Local is username and password. That's the kind of the standard that we've used for a long time. Definitely the weaker ones of all these other ones. I mean, obviously, it's much stronger for us to use Facebook, potentially, or Google, compared to using just username and password. You can see that there's many different kinds of strategies, is what they call them, for authenticating with different platforms that you might be familiar of, right? So for example, things like popular websites and so on that already have asked you for your authentication information, Flickr and Stripe and a bunch of other ones. So 502 strategies is pretty cool, and they keep growing because they keep adding other support. And this is one way of knowing that Node package is still in development. There's some great documentation here, and it talks about how to do it. So basically what we want to do is when we go to a route, right, we want to use this Passport Authenticate. And if we authenticate, then we can, as an example, then we can log in. Otherwise, we won't. And you can also do things like protect or guard, produce a guard for different routes, which we're going to talk about strategies on how to do this. So first, we're going to start by npm install Passport. We're going to also add some other things to support some of the stuff that we want to do. And again, what I want to do here is I want to start by copying our structure, our page structure. And this way, just want to make sure that we have this correct. So here we are. I want to copy week 5 and make week 6. And while that's happening, it's going to take a while to pull up my documentation on how to do this. All right, so it's copied, and just like before, what we want to do is we want to move this over to week 6. You can see how we started from very humble beginnings with Node and to where we are right now. Okay, cool. Just a reminder for everybody that's watching this video, next, or actually by the end of this week, assignment 2 is due, which is adding an authentication section to your Express portfolio site. So that's something that's important for us to mention. Okay, so now that we've got week 6, I'm going to pull up VS Code and let's bring up our folder structure and drag and drop that in there. We can see now that we're at week 6. Wonderful. One of the things that we want to do this week is, again, we do some installations first. So let's do that part first. Just going to do the installations. And let's also take a look at our package.json and see how it's growing. So we've got quite a few things here, but now we're going to add a bunch more. And I mean a lot more, right? So let's get into this. So first, what we want is, I want to have a way of displaying my messages. There's going to be a message that comes up and it's going to say, your authentication failed. I want to be able to display that somewhere. And I'm going to use something called Connect Flash for me to do that. It's a very popular module. So npm install Connect Flash and then -save. Okay, so that's the first one. Again, it's still pretty much the same as it was when I last left it, 0.11. Not a lot of development there, but it does what it's supposed to do. Next, npm install. We want Express session for this one. Express session gives us a session, a cookie that we can use to mark that we've been kind of logged in and so on. -save. Let's use that. Also, npm install Passpot. Let's do a couple of them on the same line. Passpot local, as well as Passpot local mongoose. Passpot local mongoose. These are all different modules that we need, one that couples with the other one to provide good support for authentication. All right, so that's those pieces. And you can see that those all got added in, right? And some of this has moved forward. For example, Passport local mongoose, as this strategy has moved forward. These two have stayed pretty much the same from the last time I did this. Okay. One thing also that I'd like to do is, we haven't talked about this too much, but we're going to be using TypeScript in the second half of the semester. And a lot of times what I like to do is give me some good tooling for some of the stuff that I want to do here. We don't have to use TypeScript inside of our code. And for those people who don't know what TypeScript is, let's just go there right now. You're going to be learning about it soon, but let's go to typescriptlang.org. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript that makes JavaScript easier. I love that line. And I think it does. I think it's not C# for JavaScript. It's something beyond that. It's a new language that Microsoft has developed alongside with Google for their Angular platform. Okay, that's where it came from. But now TypeScript can be used for other things too, such as to display things like code hinting. So it supports libraries out of the box. So let's suppose I want to get some code hinting for some of these libraries. For example, Passpot local, and Passpot local mongoose. I want to get some support for this stuff, so I get some good code hinting here. And I don't have it normally in Visual Studio Code. It's not bad, it's getting a lot better. But what I can do is I can use development dependencies for this. And I can do them for a lot of things, like Connect Flash. Let's do Connect Flash first. So this is how it looks. npm install @types So that's basically saying, hey, I want a type definition library for connect flash / connect flash, right? Minus save minus dev, which creates a development dependency. So that's a different dependency than this one. Development dependencies is like, we don't really need it, but it really helps when it comes to support is what we're using it for. Okay, clear the screen. npm install at types. We can put them all in a row again, all at once. We can get express at types, express session at types, mongoose at types, passport at types, passport local at types, passport local mongoose, and there's other ones. We can get more. Minus save minus dev is the important one, and then it'll go in the right spot. That's it here. Cool, we've got some type definition libraries to help us do some code hinting. That's what we did there. And we've got our libraries that we need. Excellent. Now what we want to do is we want to go into our server to start setting this up. Again, we're going to go do our configuration in our app. Our application configuration is what's happening there. Okay, so that's the first thing is we set up all the dependencies we need. And then the next thing is we go in and we configure everything in our app. Okay, awesome. So let's take a look at this. So up until here, we had everything going on as before. We have our connection to our database here, but I want to put a section in here for modules for authentication. This is the modules we're going to put in here. So we're going to start off with session. Let session equal to require, and then express session. Okay, so that's express session. Let passport equal to require passport. Let passport local equal require passport local. And then let local strategy, that's the login and stuff like that, and password, username, password, passport local dot strategy. Okay, so that's the setup. And we're going to say let, if I can spell properly, let flash equal to require connect dash flash. Okay, that's what that does. Okay, so that's all the authentication stuff. And we're going to include that in our new modules. All right, so as stuff, we do a database setup as normal. We get our connection to the database. That's all good. We've got our index router as an example, and we're going to use our index router for logging in and logging out as an example. And so far so good. I think the rest looks pretty good in terms of our setup. Okay, so now after this, so before our routes, we're going to start setting up some other stuff. Let's set up express session. So app.use. We're going to say session, which is the session variable above, is going to be, we're going to put our secret here. Now we could actually hold this secret in our config. This is some secret. And as well as save uninitialized is false, and then resave is false. Again, just some of these options that we put in to make sure that these are good. And it says session options, resave, boolean, resave unknown word. This is the code hinting we're talking about from before. So session has a bunch of different options. You can see that I'm getting a lot of them now. I'm getting that because I installed my type definition files. Okay, same thing with logger, same thing with a bunch of other stuff. Okay, express. Okay, so this is pretty cool. We've got this part, and now we want to use Flash. We want to set Flash up. Remember, Flash is going to be this ability for us to have messages persist between retries. So if I want to try and log in, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll send the person back to the login screen. But when they go back to the login screen, then the error message disappears. So they never have an error message. But what Connect Flash does is it maintains the error message. It puts it inside of local storage, and then it shows us the error message later. All right, we can do it by ourselves, but this does it for us. Why not use it? So app.use Flash is how this looks. All right, then we want to initialize Passport. So initialize Passport. Okay, app.use passport.initialize, right? That initializes the whole passport piece. App.use, we're going to say passport.session. So we're going to kick off our session. And if you hover over that, it tells you what it does. It says authenticator, that's what that is. And this one here is a session, right, that we're going to kind of put together. Okay. Cool. And then we want to set up our user configuration. One thing we don't have right now is a user model. So before we continue, we need to create a new user model in order for us to authenticate some kind of user. We can't authenticate without a user model. Let's get in that and try and do it. So again, I'm going to go to models. I'm going to go to new file. We're going to call this the user model. For the user models, we're going to take a break from our app.js just for a second while we configure the user model. So inside the user model itself, we want to do something very similar to what we've done before, except our schema is going to look different. So again, we have some things that we want for the user model. We're going to say mongoose. Definitely need that because that's part of our model. And we're also going to say passport local mongoose. This is new. That's going to be equal to require passport local mongoose. So that kind of connects all the passport local strategy plus the mongoose connection to MongoDB. We're going to say we want the user, here's our user, to use a mongoose schema, just like we did with our book. And inside of our mongoose schema, we also want to specify a collection. We did this last time, where we have our collection as users. Okay, our users collection. If this makes sense. So, collection, users, books, right? Contacts, and whatever else, products, services, whatever else you want. There's plural. Okay, now for our properties, we're going to break these properties down a little differently this time around. So we're going to start off with username. So username is kind of like the username and password part. We're going to use an object for this. There's another way of defining your properties. Type is string. We can go this way. Default, that's equal to nothing. Trim is true. What this does is it removes additional information, and required, we can say that username is required in the form when we enter it in. So that's the username. Okay, then we're going to do the same thing for our passport. So usually password we use in there, we leave in there for password. But the thing with passwords, we don't need it. What's going to happen, our Passport local mongoose strategy is going to hash our password, create a very secure password for us. And it's not going to save it as clear text. So we'll never store it as a clear text password. It'll be stored as something else. Okay. However, we don't need to put in a password in here, but I'm gonna scaffold it out as if we did. So I'll say password. Imagine if we had a password, it would look like this. Okay, and the type again would be string. If it was a clear text password, the default again would be nothing, and the trim would be true, as well as required. We could have a message that says like password is required. Okay, so that's kind of the way we can do this, kind of like the single quotes instead of the double quotes lately. All right, so that's username and password, but we need other information to create our user. One of them is a email address. So email. In fact, a lot of times people are using email over username. Type is string, and then default, and we just take the same, we'll take the same part here, and we'll just use a different set of options. Instead of password, it's email address is required, right? We don't need this. Okay, so that is email. We want also a way of a friendly display for the user. If we want to bring the user and display their name on the nav bar, we want to say, hey, instead of username, Tom, as an example. That could be something. So I'm just going to grab this and we're going to add that in as another property. We're going to call this display name. And we're going to say that the display name is required. Okay. And we're also going to have the date created as well as the date updated if you want to update the profile. So we're going to say created. The type is date. The default is date.now. Okay. Date.now. And I'm just going to delete this part here because we don't care about this. This is going to be something that's automatically done. And it'll be the same thing with updated. So created and updated. Let's say update. It'll be date and date.now, the default. And that is really our schema or our structure for our user. Do I have to do this? No, I don't have to. In fact, I can go with the other structure we use for book, which is much shorter. But I want to show you that sometimes you'll see a structure that looks like this when you're looking up things online, and it's perfectly fine. It's not going to mess with anything. If you were to do something like this, you can add additional data. One thing to note is that our update, you can see that the date now is the default. That's like saying, update is equal to, something. And that's what this allows us to do, which the other structure did not. Let's configure it now. So one thing is we make it, and then we configure it. So configure options for our user model. And what we want to do here is we want to set the options, because this is something that we can do with Passport Local Mongoose, is we can say that missing password error is wrong missing password. Okay, hopefully we'll never see that error. Well, we might. And we can say that user dot plugin, and we want to use this Passport local mongoose, and then options. So we want to kind of send the options, these ones here, missing passport error, to Passport local mongoose. All right, that's what they do. And you can see that if I hover over, it gives me that information. And then finally, module.exports.user equals to mongoose.model, and then we want to pass in the user model as well as the user object, which is really the user structure. So this is the structure for our user. We can't do any kind of authentication without this. This is the first kind of these things that we kind of put together are our first steps. And I'm seeing that there's an error. Let's make sure we trace that error. So email and display name. Let's make sure that I've got everything nipped here. And where are we getting that error? Oh, here. Right. Right. Okay. It looks like it's pretty good. I think I'm confident that it's going to work out okay. All right. So that is the user model. Back to our app.js. So now that we've got the user model done, we're still completing the configuration on the app.js. You can see how long this takes for doing everything. So we set up Express, the session. We did our Flash, the Passport stuff, and now we're going to be into the user. So we're going to Passport user configuration. So how do we do that? We're going to say we're going to create a user model object or instance, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to say let user model equal to require ... /models /user. Okay, so that's why we did all that work just now. And then once we have our user model, right, we're going to say that the user is equal to our user model dot user. And the reason for this is because our user model has a user object that's inside of it. And so we want to make this alias. That's what this is happening. This is an alias that we're going to use. Okay, so now that we've got this, we want to serialize and deserialize. So that means like encrypt and decrypt the user info, right? So deserialize. And so we're going to use Passport for that. We're going to say passport.serialize user, and we're going to pass in a reference to the user serialize user object. Okay, so that's what we're going to do with that one. And we're going to use deserialize user, and I mean this is like encrypt and decrypt. That's what it means. Okay, so that's what this does. So far, so good. So we have our index router, our users, which we're not really using right now, and our contact router. And I think we're set up pretty good for everything that we need to do. There's nothing else that I really feel, looking at this, that we're missing. Okay, at least not from a configuration perspective. Let's test it by running it. So we're going to go clear, and then we'll see if there's any errors when this comes up. Okay, crash says port 3000 already in use. So this is something that can happen to you. Remember what we did. We started off our NodeMon. We closed down Visual Studio Code, And unfortunately what's happened is it's left NodeMon working on another installation. This is totally something that's possible to happen. So we can hunt through and kill the process. We could do that, right? Or we can just change our server temporarily to another port, which is totally fine. So instead of 3000, let's go with 3500 and then save. And now we're good to go again. We can work on 3500 instead of 3000. So let's go back up to here. And what we want to do is we want to change this to 3500 just to make sure that it's good. So there's 3500. We're seeing the same everything as before. And we're just on a different port altogether. Okay, cool. So this looks like we're not getting any errors. This is a good sign. We're kind of in a good flow right now in terms of the stuff that we've had to do. And again, this is still preparing. We haven't actually done authentication. This is just putting pieces together so we can use it. So before we stop this video, I know this is a little longer, I want to include partials or pieces for login and log out and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's an important place to stop when we do that. So that this is all the prep for authentication is what we're doing right now. Okay, so we're going to create an auth view, an auth folder, new folder. We're going to call this auth, so we know we can kind of go in there. So views, auth, and then there's two views we need. One is a login.ejs, and the other one is a register. All right, so new file, register.ejs. One thing we're not going to have, we're not going to do full user CRUD. We could. Changing passwords is tricky, right? But we're not going to do that here. But what we're going to do here is actually allow us to log in and log out. And we have some strategies here that we're going to use for our views. So let's start off with the login. Login and registration look very similar. But we know that just like we did for our book stuff, let's go into our add page. We know that we need some of this. So we need this, and we're just going to split our page again. We're going to look at our login as well, or the header and main nav, as well as our kind of our footer. And we're just going to put that in the right. I'm typing in the wrong thing, but that's okay. I meant to go here, and I wanted to go into here. That's all. All right, so that's kind of the add page, and I have my login, and registration is going to look like login. Give some space here for login because we have these partial files. And notice that we're reusing them, and this is why we did this, because I'm going to have many templates, but I still want the same nav bar. I still want some of the same stuff. If I wanted to swap out a footer and add different scripts, I could do that too. If I wanted to swap out a header and add different scripts, I could do that too. The main nav, I can put a secondary nav in there, or another bottom nav. These are all replaceable components that we can swap around, which is very flexible. Okay, so what we want to do here, let's start off with our login page. I'm just going to kill this side and start off with login first. See what that looks like. So we're going to have a main container with the class of container. Okay, and again, let's shift this to HTML5 to make our life a lot easier from a code hinting perspective. Inside that, what we want is an if statement for our connect flash. We want to do that for sure. I'm just thinking here, plus some kind of row. You know what? Let's just do this for now. All right, so let's do the next part. So we want a little message area. So in here, this is going to be our message area. or we're going to say you failed to authenticate or whatever. We're going to run a little if statement. We're going to say the message is dot length. We're going to have a messages object. If it's greater than 0, so there's some kind of message that came back at us, then we're going to, remember what we do, we put in the closing loop for our if statement or for loop or whatever down in here, just like this, so that we don't forget. Okay, so that's this part, and then we're going to say that inside there, if it's true, then we're going to add a new div. The div is only going to be there with the class of alert danger, right? The only time we're going to have that div in there is if we have messages to show. That's what messages is. And we're going to put in messages to show what the messages are. The message, like you failed to log in, or whatever the message is going to be. Okay, so that's this area, the message area. Then underneath the message area, that's where the login form is going to take place. We're going to say div, the class of row. Inside that, we're going to put div. And we want to put a medium offset column. Let me just make sure that what that looks like. Offset.md.3 column.md.6. I think I like that. That I'm going to use for everything else. column.md.4. All right. Offset.md.4 is what I meant to do. Offset. And as well as column.md.4. And it's dash to do those things. Okay. And then inside that, we're going to have an h1 tag with please log in. Okay, an h1 tag. And next to that, we're going to have a form object. Okay, a form object with a method that is the post method. Okay, and that's how that looks. Okay, so that kind of starts framing off our structure. And I think I'm liking how this is going to look. Okay, so now inside of our form, just like we did before, what we're going to have here, definitely want autocomplete off. Let's just turn that on, autocomplete. We're going to say that that is off. We don't want to ever have autocomplete on our login and log out, even though many people do. Field set, we're going to have a field set with a class of form-group, and what we want in there is a label, and we want to make the attribute for the label equal to something. So we want to say that it's going to be username. That's the attribute for the label. And then next to the label, there's going to be an input with a class of form-control and several other properties. Okay, so what this does again is just, all I'm doing is scaffolding out really quickly. Scaffolding, to me, is always like a quick way of creating structures. That's what we're doing here. So label a username, right? That's going to say username. We can actually say, username. And the type for the input is text. This is good. The class is form control. That is also good. We also need to put in some additional information in here. The name is equal to username. The placeholder is equal to enter username. And the ID is also equal to username. If you want to tap into that, it's required. And we're also going to give it auto focus. And we're going to say that auto complete, just in case, is going to equal to off. Now, you know what? I don't think that is even a thing anymore. So let's just get rid of that altogether and then complete this part right here. All right, so that's pretty good. That's our field set for our username. The ID is username, the type, form control, and so on, and that gives us our control for our username. Let's do the same thing for password. So this one will be password. The text, the type is password, so it won't show it to us. For password, and the name is password. Enter password. ID is also password. This one we don't want to autofocus. We want to say that it's required. We won't allow the field for us to skip through it. All right, and then what we want is a field set with a class of form group. And we want text right. And inside there, we want an input with a class of button button dash success. Okay. And that's the first one. So that is a input type, but it's going to look like a button. And the type is submit. Okay, type is submit. And what we also want is a value for this one. Value is equal to login. And then we want a anchor tag with a class of button dash warning. Okay. With an href of slash. So it's going to take us into our main page. Okay, so far that's what it's going to do. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this thing. We're going to wrap this thing all together. This is a bit of a trick that we used here, I think. Yes, I remember. We're going to wrap this thing and button dash warning. And we're going to say that the type is a button and the value is equal to cancel. Yes, I remember now. Okay. Wonderful. All right, so that is our login page. And now let's do the register page. So register page is very similar because it has a lot of the same things as the login page. And again, just like we said, there is an opportunity for us maybe down the road to do some pruning and take some information from one and feed it into the other and make one page, one template for both. So this part is we're going to start with everything that's inside of this page. So we're going to go one of these because we're going to have pretty much everything in here. except more. Okay, so I'm just going to hone in there and also maybe step in a little bit. Same thing with these ones, just from a formatting perspective. Get that in there. I think we're good. Okay, so just copied everything across from one to the other. So there's no need for us to do this anymore. So we can kill this, and the same thing with this. And now just look at the register page. There we go. So what needs to change? Well, it should say please register instead of please log in. There's please register. And our login page should also ask if we want to register as well. So the form action being post of this action method has to go away. And it's got to go away for the login page as well. That's something that I forgot. Autocomplete is off. Field set is form. Username text. Form control name is username. Placeholder is enter username. And ID is username. Autocomplete is off. So these are all good. This username stuff. Same thing with password. You're going to put a password together. It's going to put a password in there. Form control password is no problem. And then we're going to get into another field set, which is email address. So let's do that one. So this will be email. This will be email here for email. Enter email. Email address. Yeah. So that's this part. And then let's do the next part, which is going to be the display name. So again, display name type is equal to text. Name is equal to display name. ID display name for display name. Enter display name. And these are all required. And then our form group at the bottom, we can, instead of login, we can register. And this will cancel and take us back to the main screen. This is a type of submit. All this is good. And I just want to make sure I think we'd like to register. So one thing we missed in the login is a way to get to the register screen, which will be through the login. So login, I'm going to say put your password in. We'll put it in the same field set. Or we'll say we'll use an anchor tag with a href of register. We don't have that yet, the route, and I'll just say register or register here. Okay, so that's going to do. And that should cover most of what we need to do for our pages. So that was a long one. This is all the prep. I did all the prep ready to go for the stuff that we're doing, and that took a bit of time, as you can see. Lots of prep for authentication. We downloaded and installed different packages. You can see that in the packet.json. We also installed some type definition files for helper. We ended up creating a model for our user. We had to do all that to start the authentication process. Then we configured everything in our config app JS file. We went through and configured everything here that we talked about. Everything from the local strategy that we're going to use to the sessions and everything else. Everything is ready to go for the next time. And so for now, we're going to say goodbye And in the next video, we're going to hook everything up and perform our first authentication. Thank you.